You ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This is Every Best Picture, our series where we go through all of the Best Picture Oscar winners from 1929 or 1927 even, right to the present day. This week, we are talking 1933's Cavalcade.
Hey, but you know the drill. Before we get going, first of all, if you're one of our first 300 subscribers, thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We look forward to seeing where we go in this wonderful series of Every Best Picture, as well as the many movie reviews and top 5 videos that we're doing. But help us get to 500. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Become one of the subscribers and join the others on this wonderful film journey that we're going on. And don't forget the Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers, so you have been warned. James?
Okay, so Cavalcade, Best Picture winner 1933, directed by Frank Lloyd, adapted from the Noel Coward stage play of the same name. Mm-hmm. This is essentially a story of Britain in the first 3 decades of the 20th century, beginning as the new century is dawning, literally on New Year's Eve, and we follow a family, the Marriotts. Wealthy, well-to-do British family, and we also follow their sort of servants as well. So it's kind of an upstairs, downstairs kind of deal where we're following them through a number of very key pivotal historical events, from the Boer War to the death of Queen Victoria, which sort of in a way was the death knell, the beginning of the end of the British Empire kind of thing. There's the sinking of the Titanic, and then the Great War, of course, as well, and leading on after that. So where to begin with this one, Steve?
Well, my initial impression, James, is that since we've begun this Best Picture series together, the films that we have reviewed thus far have been like the early foundational versions of movies we will see done differently in the years to come. They almost set the foundation. And I almost want to dare to say this is almost, watching Cavalcade, this feels like almost the first art house film that I got to see, in a way that, it's obviously based on a play by Noel Coward. And it doesn't have the normal tropes. It had this art house feel, and somehow things happen for no particular reason. There is sudden deaths. There are sudden turns of events without the natural movie progressions that we've come to understand in movies that are of a more general appeal. This film didn't strike me as something that was appealing to the general public per se, even though I really wanted to get behind it. Right when it starts up, it's got Big Ben, it's got London, it's got the whole British vibe going. I'm thinking I'm going to settle in for something I'm really going to enjoy. And what ended up happening was you start to like certain characters, and then they die suddenly, and romances begin, and then they end for no apparent reason whatsoever. And that's what I mean with the art house vibe, is things tend to happen suddenly and often without the normal events that would normally lead up to such things occurring. You don't have this great feeling at the end of this movie. You feel kind of like, of course, in Wings and All Quiet on the Western Front, you don't have this wonderful warm feeling inside, but for different reasons. This one was just, tragedy happened without the emotional attachment that I feel is necessary. I felt emotionally detached every time I started to get invested emotionally with a relationship or with a particular character. They're gone.
Yeah, no, there is an element of that. It is very episodic, and you don't really feel that you've sort of learnt much from along the way. Really, this to me basically felt like the British version of Cimarron. It's
grand
kind
in
of
scale.
It's kind of covering a very similar period, a slightly shorter period. It starts slightly later, but again, it wants to promote the female perspective on it all. It kind of is anchored by the mother, the wife and mother, who stays at home, keeps everything grounded, keeps the family anchored, if you like, while her husband goes away to war or whatever, and goes off and does all these things. And in the background, you see sort of the evolution and the change of the country, right, and how it impacts sort of one family. And there's, you know, the similar kind of, I suppose it's less of an issue in an American film, I respect, but there's the class difference as well. You know, there is this upstairs downstairs thing where the same events impact people of different class in a different way,
right?
And so I thought that was somewhat interesting. But I think the biggest problem is, although you have moments where you can really feel that the film and the director Frank Lloyd exploits the cinematic aspects of the film, like sort of towards the end in there's a sequences in Trafalgar Square. You know, I think it's it's either the end of the war or it's New Year's Eve, and when the parades are coming through for Queen Victoria's funeral,
right?
But by and large, it's, and I think it's because of the theatrical origins of the story, events do tend to take place off stage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so, you know, I think the biggest example being the sinking of the Titanic.
Yeah.
You know, you have the young lovers who are they go away on their honeymoon, and you see that they're on a cruise, and you're like, oh, this is very nice. And then it's that classic thing where they walk away, and there's just the buoy, the ring, the life ring there, and it just says, you know, HMS Titanic.
See, and that's why I want to qualify my art house comparison. I wasn't suggesting, because most art house films don't have the grand scale that this film tries to take on, but it had those little moments that I felt this art house vibe, even though it's a 90-year-old movie, where these kind of things, you give a good example of these little tweaks, or these little twists, these little turns that don't follow a traditional film format. They didn't show us the sinking or any real tragedy. We were just led to believe now tragedy is going to occur. They've set up they have this wonderful romantic talk, you know, and you think, oh, this is sweet. And then they walk away and they're on the Titanic.
And, and they're dead in minutes. Yeah. You're like, it was kind of unnecessarily tragic. You know, it kind of taunts the audience, doesn't it? It's like, oh no, aren't they sweet? Yeah. They're dead now.
See, and that's where I'm kind of going in the whole art house feel. But at least for me, that was my thought. But I wanted to ask you, when you were kind of comparing it to Cimarron, and in Cimarron, obviously the wife serves as the anchor during the play out of this grand scale of events over a number of decades. I found the reciprocal in this is the toasting of the two couples. Although there is this turmoil in the country between the Boer Wars and World War I, and we see how that turmoil plays out on these two families, the one constant through the whole film, the thing that anchors everything, is the love between this couple. And them toasting at midnight on 1899 on New Year's, and then toasting again during World War I. And in World War I, obviously they're quite old. They've lost both of their children. There's been tragedy all around them, and yet their love endures, and they maintain this ritual of ringing in the new year. And it kind of, I don't know, when you're comparing it to Cimarron, I was comparing those anchor points.
Yeah, no, I guess the message there is that, you know, family is what's important, you know, and the world around you will change, and, you know, regimes will come and go, and there'll be world wars and what have you. But as long as you stick with the people closest to you, you know, and cherish those bonds and those relationships, then you will persevere. And I think there's also an element of, you know, the stiff upper lip, very British, keeping the British end up kind of thing.
Yes,
where they have their reserve and their resolve, and that will see them through these stormy seas. Because obviously it was a very sort of turbulent time for the UK. Yeah. You know, it was the end of the empire, which, you know, would obviously completely collapse at the end of World War II, when the Americans were like, "Hey, we helped you out, but we can't really condone you essentially having this massive empire that we're trying to stop other countries from doing." But I think the death of Queen Victoria really was kind of the beginning of the end for all of that. And it was this sort of struggle of identity, this crisis of conscience, this people were starting to poke holes in the great facade of sort of what it meant to be British, and how the sun never set on the British Empire, and all these kind of stuff.
Pax Britannica and all that. Yes.
Exactly. And I think because it was about that, and I thought I would like it more, probably, because, yes, I am British, and not that I condone empire building or anything like that, but it is a period of our history that, where we were the superpower kind of thing, and yes, we got it through questionable means sometimes, but I'm not here to judge that. But it is still kind of like this sort of golden era of British history, and so I thought that I would find that the story was more resonant with me, and it wasn't really.
Did you find, though, because I really wanted to enjoy this film, and there were elements that I did find enjoyable, but I found myself like Herbert Munden's Alfred Bridges, who plays the servant who goes off to war and comes back and he starts his own pub, and you want to get behind this guy, but he ends up becoming an alcoholic, embarrassing himself, and then dying suddenly for no apparent reason. Right. And okay, yes, those things happen in real life, and maybe Noel Coward in his desires to show these are the realities that happen. People that you want to succeed don't. They make bad choices, they become alcoholics, and then they die tragic death suddenly. Yes, that occurs, but is that why I want to go to the cinema? I want to go to the cinema. I'm not saying I always need a happy ending, but there needs to be more rhyme and reason in why certain events happen if I'm going to dedicate 2 hours of my life to it. And I just felt at the end of 2 hours in this film, the dots by and large were not connecting, albeit I'll concede there were elements I enjoyed.
Yeah, and Coward, I guess we have to sort of lay this at Noel Coward's feet as opposed to anybody else's, because it's his story originally. And he does it again and again and again, and even right at the end, where Joe has survived the entire war, kind of thing, and he's met up with who is it? He's going to marry Ellen, is it? Yeah,
the dancing girl. She's grown up and she's become a dancer, and
no, not Ellen. Yeah, it's not Ellen. I can't remember the name.
No,
it's the dancing. It's Ellen's.
I apologize.
Fanny.
You're right.
It's Fanny.
Yes, you're right.
Yes,
Ursula Jeans, Fanny Bridges. Yes.
And so because Ellen, Una O'Connor, who is great. Una O'Connor's great. She turns up in like Bride of Frankenstein and The Invisible Man. She's always like this sort of old crone kind of landlady, housemaid type, and she does it in her sleep. She's wonderful at that. She was a real sort of staple of these kind of roles at this kind of time. Mm-hmm. Probably just because of her accent more than anything else. But yeah, so she turns up on the doorstep at the end and sort of says, "Oh, my daughter's going to marry your son." and we're great because we've seen how they reconnected, and we're really rooting for them. And then the telegram arrives, and the mother is like, "Oh, well, that's not going to be an issue anymore because Joe has died," literally on the last day of the war. And you're like, come on, that's like at least 3 times now you've just set these characters up and then just killed them, cut them down in their prime.
Exactly. And that's what I'm kind of suggesting is, what is the purpose of that? What are you trying to communicate in the story? If you're trying to communicate that, shit happens and we just have to press on with life. Well, I'm sure that there's something to be gleaned there. And I got that, but I don't know if I necessarily come away from that thinking, wow, there's a movie that I really want to see again, or I could recommend to others.
Yeah, no, it's weird, isn't it? It's like, because it's not done with any degree of sin. I didn't feel that it was done cynically, and that was one of the things that I was kind of surprised about this story, is that because Noel Coward is obviously best known for his comedies and his wit and his satires and all those, but this felt pretty straight laced, the way it was told, and I was quite surprised about that. I thought, okay, this is going to be quite
Oscar Wilde-ish. Like, I thought it was going to be a little more witty banter type, and yes, even the dialogue I didn't think it was bad, but it lacked a certain pizzazz.
Yeah, there was no sort of snark to it. There was no great witticism behind it, great wit behind it. I mean, if you look at other films that have been adapted from Noel Coward material, you've got things like Design for Living or Blithe Spirit, or which are really sort of funny You know, they're really sharp, really witty. Whether this is something that was kind of lost in translation, or whether it's in the play and they decided to strip it out and tell something a little more somber and sincere, I'm not sure. But that would have been a pretty big decision to have made with like Noel Coward material, you know.
Right.
So I doubt that that's the case. But so if what he's trying to say is, you know, life is cruel, you know, there's no point loving anybody, there's no point making any grand plans, because you will be inevitably cut down in your prime, and death doesn't care whether you're rich or poor, you know, what you have accomplished. Death comes to us all when we least expect it, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles. It seems to be the message, you know. And you get Robert and Jane, who live through it all and end up exactly where they started, and the only thing that's happened is that they have got older.
And they lost their kids. Their little children are gone. Yeah,
they kind of go from starting a family to having no family left whatsoever, and it's just odd. The tone of it is just a bit weird, and I'm surprised to discover how successful it was.
Exactly, it was extremely successful. It makes me wonder if it's almost a metaphor for empire. You know, where you start out with this grand, you've got these children and everything's grand, and at the end you've had these sudden losses and these things that haven't, you know, really gone your way, and you watch the breakdown of the family, but in the end the mom and dad are still there, but the family's gone. So there's a little
I'm sure.
I don't know, but
that makes total sense. That, you know, England forever was how there's the expression is England forever England, or I can't remember what it is, that, you know, England will always been there, but, you know, and they've tried to expand, and they've tried to reach out, and they've tried to develop and prosper and all the rest of it, but now it's all just kind of being cut back. But I imagine if that was the metaphor, if that's what he was going for, there'd be more rhyme and reason behind the failures along the way, you know. There would be some kind of explanation for it, rather than you've overstretched,
right? In this film, bad things happen just because the universe seems aligned against these people. You know, it's just right. You know, there is no rhyme or reason. Again, my initial critique when I started this was the lack of rhyme or reason connecting the dots in this film is what kind of led me to find it very underwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, if you know, you didn't need it to happen to so many characters, I think. You know, one or two, fine. And I understand it was a period of great sort of upheaval and turmoil, and you know, of conflict and all the rest of it. Sure, but there were, I think, plenty of people whose lives were not quite so directly impacted or cut short by these things. And I think you only need one or possibly two examples of that in any story in order to illustrate your point, rather than have all of your limbs trimmed.
Yeah. And there's obviously films that in the years to come which take that whole trope of over a series of decades, how the lives of particular individuals or families intersect with the great events of those times. I mean, I think even Forrest Gump, you know, something like that, where
absolutely.
And again, with something like Forrest Gump, you have tragedy and you have joy. There has to be, to me, there needs to be a healthy balance in there. And I felt that Cavalcade lacked that balance.
Yeah, and it's weird because you see other films about this kind of generational detachment between the parents and their children, but it's normally played the other way around, where the parents slowly come to the realization that they are no longer, you know, the most pivotal generation, you know, the great generation, and they kind of step aside, and, you know, they see their children grow up, and then they realize that their children have no time for them, and they kind of sort of step back. There's films like sort of Make Way for Tomorrow, is a good example of that. The Japanese movie Tokyo Story, the Ozu movie Tokyo Story, is another fantastic example of that, where the parents just realize that their children are all grown up and have their own lives and are independent, and really have no space and no time for them anymore. Whereas this is kind of takes the opposite approach, where the parents are the ones who survive through everything, and have to watch all of their children pretty much sort of die horribly horribly in the process. And you're like, okay, but it makes for fairly grim viewing.
Exactly. So obviously the Cavalcade won the Best Picture award, the Academy Award, at the 6th Academy Awards, which was at the Ambassador Hotel in 1934. And it was hosted by Will Rogers. And one of the anecdotes from that Oscar was when the Best Director was being declared by Will Rogers, when he opened the envelope, he just looked up and said, "Come on and get it, Frank." Unfortunately, Frank Lloyd won, but Frank Capra was so sure that he was going to win for Lady for a Day that he ran up there. And the winner was obviously Cavalcade's Frank Lloyd. However, they wanted to downplay the gaffe. So they had George Cukor come up to the other director that was nominated, and they brought them all three up there. But it was Frank Lloyd who won instead of Frank Capra. But it made me think of when La La Land was announced at the Academy Awards a couple of years ago, and it was instead Moonlight that was the actual winner. And the embarrassment, the embarrassment of the wrong name being called and called up to the stage.
Right. Oh yeah, or in Zoolander, where he just assumes that he's won, and he goes up when they've actually called out Hansel's name.
That's right.
And,
Hansel.
Much to his embarrassment. No, that must be mortifying. I can't imagine how you must feel. Frank Capra must feel. Well, although he didn't have to wait too long.
I was just going to say he's got his gold coming.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Cavalcade ended up winning 3 awards. It won Best Film, Best Director, and Best Art Direction. And I don't really have an issue with any of those. That's apart from the fact that I didn't really like the film. But
the big question though is that we always ask, and what underpins this series, James, though, is does it deserve its place in history? Does it stand the test of time? Can it answer those questions? How would you answer that for Cavalcade?
I would say no. No, it doesn't really deserve to be remembered. Does it stand the test of time? No, it's a fairly sort of dull and somber and uneventful, ironically, a fairly uneventful movie, considering how it's supposed to be this kind of patchwork of the great events of the first 3 decades or whatever. But if you look at what it was up against, films like 42nd Street, Farewell to Arms, I Was a Fugitive, From a Chain Gang, Little Women, Private Life of Henry. These are all far better known movies today.
Absolutely.
Than Cavalcade was, and have endured far better than this movie has, State Fair as well. And I think that tells you pretty much all that you need to know, is that Cavalcade won and then promptly disappeared.
Which will reoccur in the years to come at a number of points in Academy history.
Oh yes, even fairly recently. I think the only other thing historically worth noting is that this was the last time until 2020 when the Oscars eligibility period spanned more than simply one calendar year, because it was always, they hadn't quite figured it out yet. And so this was the year when they were like, right, we've got to kind of lock it in properly. So it stretched a little bit earlier and then went all the way through the following year, just so they could then go, okay, fine, it's from now on, it's going to be calendar year to calendar year. And it wasn't until 2020, because of the pandemic, that they stretched eligibility right through into, I think, the end of February 21.
Yeah, I agree with you, James. I think listeners will pretty much sum up how we feel about Cavalcade. It's, in my opinion, was underwhelming. Doesn't really stand the test of time. It wasn't a horrible film by any stretch, but I just feel, given the names of the other films that were nominated and have stood the test of time much better, I think we can fairly say that Cavalcade is lucky to have the high honor and place in history it has, because I don't know if it would get it today.
True. I don't think I would have. This was the first time I'd seen it, and I don't think I would have ever got around to it otherwise.
Well, I think we may feel a little different about the next film in our series, It Happened One Night, which we're looking forward to sharing with you. That's the next film in our Every Best Picture series. James, until then, but go ahead. Sorry. No.
But I'm curious what other people think. What do you think? Do you agree with this? Is Cavalcade a missed opportunity or a misfire? If you like it, please let us know what resonates with you. What do you think its enduring strengths and weaknesses are? Please do let us know in the comments.
Hey, and you can always find James and I on Instagram or Twitter if you want to look for us on social media. Those links will be in the descriptions below. And we look forward to you continuing on with us in this series. Until next week, James.
You're wonderful
Goodbye.
to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.